I want you to picture the wild coast of South Africa.
Right. Just the name itself is intimidating.
Exactly. The date is July 27th, 1909. And, I mean, you are just entirely surrounded by a sensory nightmare.
Oh, absolutely.
The gales are howling off the Southern Ocean, and this is the kind of wind that doesn't just blow, it violently screams at you,
Yeah.
it rattles your eardrums, it makes it impossible to even stand upright on a deck.
Yeah, you'd just be instantly blown off your feet.
Right, and it's pitch black. A darkness so absolute, it feels literally suffocating, and these towering, violent swells are rising up like black mountains against the night sky.
It's just a terrifying scene to even imagine.
It really is, and plunging straight into the heart of this ungodly cyclone is the SS Waratah. She is a 465-foot, 9,000-ton steel leviathan. The entire shipping world is calling her this, unsinkable luxury liner.
Which is always a dangerous label.
Yeah, exactly. But out there in the dark in 1909, there is no radio communication. There are no SOS distress calls flashing across the ether.
Nothing. Just silence on the airwaves.
Right. There is just the deafening roar of the freezing sea, the screech of bending steel, and absolute profound isolation. Out there in those violent waters, 211 men, women, and children are about to vanish off the face of the earth, leaving absolutely no trace behind.
It is the ultimate void. I mean, that's really the only way to describe it. And that is exactly what we're trying to penetrate in our deep dive today.
Yeah, we have a lot to get through.
We do. We are taking a massive stack of historical sources. So we've got the original 1910 Board of Trade Inquiry transcripts. We have terrifying personal diary entries, naval search logs, and century-old newspaper clippings. We're using all of this to try and understand how a marvel of modern engineering just evaporates.
Right, because things like this don't just disappear.
Exactly. This isn't just a historical footnote about a missing ship. It is a real-life horror story. We are essentially performing an autopsy on a ghost, dissecting the sheer, unforgiving power of the ocean and the staggering, almost unfathomable hubris of the men who thought they could tame it.
The hubris is what really gets me, because when you look at these sources, especially the blueprints and the corporate records of the Waratah, the arrogance is literally baked into the steel.
Oh, without a doubt.
Let's trace this back to the ship's birth. So she was commissioned in 1907 by W. London Sons for the Blue Anchor Line. And this ship was built by the Barclay Curle Shipyard in Glasgow.
It was huge at the time.
Yeah, we really have to remember what Glasgow was like back then. It was the beating heart of the global shipbuilding industry. You have thousands of men driving red-hot rivets into massive steel plates, basically building the empires of the sea.
Right, it was industrial dominance.
Exactly. And the investment here was colossal. It cost a massive £139,900. In today's money, that is an astronomical sum for a single vessel. They built her to be a marvel.
They really did.
The engineers gave her 8 distinct watertight compartments.
Well,
And because of those compartments, the executives, the press, and the engineers all proudly declared that the Waratah was, quote, practically immune from any danger of sinking.
which is, historically speaking, the single most dangerous phrase you can utter in a shipyard.
Oh, 100%.
When you see the phrase practically immune or unsinkable in maritime history, you are almost always looking at the first nail in a massive watery coffin.
Yeah, it never ends well.
Never. The Blue Anchor Line designed the Waratah with a dual purpose, which is really where some of the compromises began. She was built for extreme luxury, but also for heavy, heavy cargo.
Right, she had to do both.
Yeah. On the luxury side, she was a floating palace. She was designed to cater to wealthy immigrants and travelers journeying between Europe and Australia. The blueprints detail a spectacular music lounge, complete with a minstrel's gallery.
Wow.
The first-class staterooms were fitted with these exquisite hand-carved panels depicting the Waratah flower, her namesake. But beneath all that opulence, she was a beast of burden.
Right, down below deck.
Exactly. She had the capacity to carry hundreds of steerage passengers in much less comfortable conditions down below, right alongside massive cargo holds meant for frozen meats, dairy, wool, and, crucially, for our story later on, thousands of bars of bullion and hundreds of tons of heavy metal ore.
The contrast there is just jarring. I mean, you have people sipping champagne and listening to string music on the upper decks, while just a few feet below them, you've got hundreds of steerage passengers and literally tons of raw lead ore.
It's a surreal image, yeah.
It is. But before we even get into the cargo and the physical flaws, there is a psychological element to the story that I found genuinely creepy in these historical logs.
Oh, the name.
Yes, the name. So they named the ship the Waratah, after the beautiful red floral emblem of New South Wales and Australia. Sounds lovely,
Sure.
right?
On paper.
Right. But if you know anything about maritime history, there was already a dark, looming shadow over that specific name. According to the maritime loss records we have here, 4 previous ships named Waratah had already been claimed by the sea.
Which is just an insane track record.
It's unbelievable. One went down in 1848 off Ushant, France. Another sank in 1887 near Sydney. A third was lost just south of Sydney shortly after that. And a fourth went down in 1897 in the Gulf of Carpentaria.
Wow.
I mean, I have to ask you why. To me, as someone who doesn't build ships, naming your brand new, astronomically expensive luxury liner after 4 sunken wrecks is the exact equivalent of moving your family into a house where 4 previous families were brutally murdered.
That's a great analogy.
It's like, why on earth would seasoned shipping executives tempt fate like that?
It's a fantastic question, and it speaks perfectly to the mindset of early 20th century maritime engineering. You really have to put yourself in the Edwardian mindset here.
Okay, set the scene, Chris.
Well, this is the era of the Industrial Revolution reaching its absolute zenith. The Waratah had been rigorously inspected and granted Lloyd's of London's top classification, which was plus 100 A1.
Which was a big deal.
Oh, a massive deal. That rating wasn't handed out lightly. It was the global gold standard, granted only after relentless inspections during design, construction, and exhaustive sea trials.
So they felt invincible.
Completely. The engineers and owners genuinely deeply believed that steel, steam, and advanced mathematics had finally permanently conquered the ocean.
Right. They thought they were past all that superstition.
Exactly. They look at those 4 previous wooden ships named Waratah and dismiss their sinkings as relics of a primitive past. They thought, we are subject to superstitions. We have watertight compartments and triple expansion steam engines.
Yeah, we've got math on our side.
Right. They were utterly blinded by their own technological advancements, dismissing not just historical omens, but as we'll see, some very real, very practical physical dangers.
And that blind faith in their own math was tested almost immediately. Because reading through the logs of the ship's very first voyage, it becomes horrifyingly clear that she was a vessel that just felt fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, the problem started right out of the gate.
Oh, exactly. Let's look at November 1908. The Waratah departs London for her maiden voyage to Australia. By December 6th, she is far out at sea. And deep in the sweltering, dark belly of the ship, a fire breaks out in the lower starboard coal bunker.
And we aren't talking about a quick flash fire that the crew quickly extinguishes.
No, not at all.
This fire smolders, burns, and reignites repeatedly for 4 agonizing days. The subsequent inquiry found that the cause was uninsulated heat radiating from the reducing and steam valves on the starboard side of the engine room, right against the bulkhead of the coal bunker.
I really want you, the listener, to try and imagine the atmosphere down there. Picture the claustrophobic terror for the crew. You are hundreds of miles from any landmass.
You're completely trapped.
Trapped in the suffocating dark belly of a metal ship, breathing in thick, acrid coal smoke. The steel walls around you are scorching hot to the touch. You are desperately fighting a fire that refuses to die, shoveling burning coal out of a bunker, all while the massive, unforgiving ocean rolls constantly beneath your feet.
It's a literal descent into hell.
It is. But the wildest part of these logs is that the fire wasn't even the scariest part of that maiden voyage. It was the physical movement of the ship itself.
The roll.
Yes, the roll. Captain Josiah Edward Ilbery, a highly respected 30-year maritime veteran, is quietly terrified. He had previously captained the Waratah's older sister ship, the Geelong, which was built by a different yard, and he realizes almost instantly that his massive new command does not handle like her sister.
No, she handles very differently. But Captain Ilbery kept his dread professional and largely to himself, likely due to immense pressure from the Blue Anchor Line executives to ensure a flawless maiden voyage.
Right, you don't want to panic the passengers.
Exactly. But the passengers absolutely noticed. The movement was impossible to ignore. We have this incredible first-hand account of Professor William Bragg, a prominent physicist who was traveling on board.
And it really takes a physicist to articulate what was happening.
It does. It takes a physicist to truly articulate the danger of what they were experiencing. Professor Bragg notices something deeply, deeply disturbing while he's simply trying to take a bath in his cabin.
Which sounds so mundane, but it's terrifying.
Right. He documents that the ship lists so far to the starboard side that the water won't even drain out of the bathtub. It all pools to one side. But worse than the deep list itself is the duration.
How long it stayed there?
Yes. He notes that the ship hangs there, leaning precariously into the ocean for hours at a time before finally snapping back upright, only to settle into a similar, lingering list on the port side.
When I was reading Bragg's account, I was trying to visualize this for myself, and I think the best way I can describe it is if you imagine one of those old Weeble Wobble toys.
Oh, yeah, the little egg-shaped toys?
Right, you know the jingle, Weebles wobble but they don't fall down? You push it over and it instantly snaps back to the center because all the heavy weight is perfectly clustered at the very bottom.
That's a properly balanced system.
Exactly. But imagine a Weeble Wobble that is fundamentally broken. Imagine you push it over, and instead of bouncing right back up, it hesitates.
It just gets stuck.
It stays pushed over, nearly flat on the ground, fighting an agonizing, invisible battle against gravity, struggling, vibrating, and taking way too long to slowly right itself.
That is a deeply unsettling feeling.
For the passengers on board, every single time a wave rolled that ship, it must have brought a moment of silent, suffocating dread. You're sitting in the dining room, the floor tilts steeply, your silverware slides off the table, and the ship just stays tilted.
You're just waiting for it to come back up.
Yeah, you have to wonder, is this the role where the ship finally loses the battle and we don't come back up?
It's a brilliant analogy, and what's fascinating from an engineering standpoint is the underlying physics causing that exact hesitation you're describing.
Right, the actual math behind the terror.
Yeah. Professor Bragg, observing his bathtub, accurately concluded the ship suffered from a severe stability flaw. Its metacenter was located just below its center of gravity.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener, because metacenter sounds like heavy engineering jargon. If we stick with the Weeble Wobble toy, how does the metacenter play into that hesitation?
Think of the metacenter as the invisible pivot point around which a ship naturally rolls in the water. For any ship to be fundamentally stable, its center of gravity. So, the concentrated weight of its hull, cargo, and superstructure must sit safely below that metacentric pivot point.
Okay, so that's your functional Weeble Wobble.
Exactly. But if a ship is built too tall, or has too many heavy luxury decks added up top, meaning the center of gravity is too high, the metacenter actually drops below the center of gravity. The math flips.
And that's when things get dangerous.
Extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
When that mathematical flip happens, you get this terrifying physical reality. A vessel that is dangerously top-heavy, producing a slow, agonizingly lingering roll. Now, here is the tragic irony of Edwardian ship design. Many first-class passengers actually preferred this top-heavy design.
Wait, they preferred feeling like the ship was going to tip over?
Well, they didn't understand the danger. You see, a perfectly stable ship with a low center of gravity snaps back upright very quickly when hit by a wave. It's a sharp, jarring, uncomfortable motion that causes severe seasickness.
Oh, so a stable ship is actually a bumpier ride.
Exactly. A top-heavy ship, conversely, produces a very slow, sweeping, soft roll. It feels, comfortable to a naive passenger sipping tea in the lounge.
But not to the captain.
No, definitely not. To a 30-year veteran mariner like Captain Ilberry or an observant physicist like Professor Bragg, that soft, lingering roll is the unmistakable signature of a highly unstable vessel that is constantly flirting with the absolute point of no return.
So Captain Ilbury absolutely knows his ship is a top-heavy death trap, but he keeps his mouth shut, presumably because you don't talk badly about the company's 139,900-pound investment if you want to keep your job.
Right, the corporate pressure was immense.
And that corporate silence brings us to the second voyage. July 1909. The Waratah is on her way back from Australia, heading towards South Africa. And this unnatural, creeping movement of the ship is about to drive one specific passenger to the absolute brink of psychological collapse.
This is where the story takes a really dark turn.
It really does. Let's introduce Claude Sawyer. He's an experienced sea traveler, a rational, wealthy businessman. He boards the Waratah in Australia, and almost immediately he becomes hyperfixated on this agonizingly slow roll.
He knows something is wrong.
Yeah, he's traveled the world on ships, and he feels it deep in his bones. This massive luxury liner is dangerously, lethally top-heavy.
Sawyer's harrowing experience on this leg of the journey really transitions our deep dive from a story about engineering flaws into a pure psychological horror story. I want to really slow the pacing down here and look closely at what Sawyer endured because it is extensively documented in his later testimony.
Right. Let's put you, the listener, in Sawyer's shoes. Picture Sawyer alone in his first-class cabin. It's the dead of night. The ship is plunging through the dark, cold expanse of the Southern Ocean.
The isolation would be overwhelming.
Exactly. And every single piece of ornate wood paneling is groaning under the strain. The massive metal hull is literally screeching as the ship leans to starboard and leans and just hangs there suspended over the black water.
Just waiting to see if it rights itself.
Right. Sawyer is lying in his bed, staring at the tilted ceiling, his heart pounding. He finally manages to succumb to exhaustion and fall asleep, but his subconscious won't let him rest. He falls into a vivid, horrifying nightmare.
And this dream is incredibly detailed.
It is. He dreams of a man standing right over his bed. The man is wearing peculiar, ancient dress, and he is holding a long, wicked sword in his right hand. And in his other hand, the entity is holding a rag that is completely soaked in fresh blood.
Terrifying image.
The figure stands there, silent and terrifying, just a barrier between Sawyer and the waking world.
And the vision is so visceral, so deeply, profoundly unsettling, that Sawyer wakes up in a cold sweat, entirely convinced that what he just saw was not just a nightmare, but a genuine, supernatural premonition of impending carnage.
It shakes him so deeply to his core that he takes an action that seems completely insane to his fellow passengers. He abandons his ticket.
Which is unheard of.
Right. Think about that. He is a rational, highly successful businessman. He paid a premium for a first-class ticket all the way back to London. But when the ship docks at Durban, South Africa on July 25th, he packs his bags and flees the vessel.
He just walks away.
He is so immensely relieved to be off that floating coffin that he immediately goes to the telegraph office and wires his wife back in London. The telegram, which we still have the text of, simply reads, "Thought Waratah top heavy, landed Durban, Claude."
Simple and to the point.
Yeah. I have to ask you, as someone who studies human behavior, how terrifying must the physical reality of a voyage be to make a rational, experienced, numbers-driven businessman believe a bloody ghost in a dream over the official, polished assurances of a massive global shipping line?
It is a remarkable case study. It really is. If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology and evolutionary biology, it's actually a brilliant, extreme example of survival instincts at work.
Okay, how so?
Well, Sawyer's conscious mind was actively noticing the unnatural physics of the ship's roll for days. His brain was constantly registering the metacentric flaw, the prolonged listing, the groaning of the overstressed hull, the sheer physical wrongness of the vessel's movement through the water.
Taking in all this data.
Exactly. But because he wasn't a naval architect, he didn't have the vocabulary or the math to articulate exactly why he was in danger. His conscious mind couldn't rationalize it perfectly. So his subconscious took over.
It stepped in to save him.
Right. It processed all of this kinetic physical data and translated it into the most universally terrifying imagery possible, a visceral, blood-soaked nightmare with a sword. It was his brain's primitive warning system screaming at him in a language he couldn't ignore. Get off this ship or you will die.
And thank God he listened to it. He stepped off the gangway in Durban and he saved his own life. But for the 211 souls left aboard, which, by the way, I found this detail in the passenger manifest, it included a convicted criminal being extradited to Australia, chained up and accompanied by 2 heavily armed police guards.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. For all of them, Sawyer's supernatural nightmare was about to become their freezing, suffocating reality.
Which brings us to the most chilling part of our investigation, the minute-by-minute descent into the abyss. We need to look closely at the final, confirmed sightings of the Waratah as she steamed directly into a meteorological monster.
So we have the timeline from the inquiry logs. Let's walk through it. July 26th at 20.15 hours, the Waratah leaves the safety of Durban Harbor, steaming out into the night ocean.
Everything's relatively normal at this point.
Yeah. The next morning, July 27th at 06.00 hours, she is sighted by another vessel, the Clan MacIntyre. The 2 ships exchange pleasantries via signal lamp, just routine maritime chatter. Everything seems perfectly fine.
Right. Business as usual.
The Waratah is a faster, more modern ship, making about 13 knots, so she slowly overtakes the Clan MacIntyre and steams away, disappearing over the horizon by 09.3 a.m. That interaction on the morning of July 27th is the absolute last time the Waratah is ever seen clearly in the daylight.
And the reason for that is what happened meteorologically just a few hours later.
Storm hits.
Yes. Shortly after she crosses the horizon, the weather violently, rapidly turns.
Huh.
We are talking about the brutal deterioration of a localized storm front into a full-blown catastrophic cyclone.
Which is just awful
It's
timing.
the worst-case scenario. The captain of the Clan MacIntyre, who was sailing in the wake of the Waratah, later went on record at the inquiry, stating it was unequivocally the worst, most terrifying weather he had experienced in his entire 13-year career at sea.
That's saying something for a seasoned sailor.
Absolutely. We're talking about winds of exceptional hurricane-force strength, tearing the tops off of waves and creating rogue swells the size of multi-story office buildings.
And it's in the heart of this blinding, deafening maelstrom that we get what I can only call the phantoms in the dark. These unconfirmed, deeply unsettling encounters reported by other ships fighting for their lives in the storm.
These are the stories that really stick with you.
They really do. Let's look at the first one. At 17:30 that evening, as the sky is darkening, a steamer named the Harlow sees a ship on the distant horizon churning out a massive, unnatural amount of thick black smoke.
So much smoke that it's alarming.
Exactly. It's putting out so much smoke, in fact, that the Harlow's captain initially assumes the distant ship has suffered a massive bunker fire. Night falls, the storm is absolutely raging. The crew of the Harlow looks back through the driving rain and sees the running lights of a large steamer approaching them from behind in the pitch black.
Just these eerie lights in the dark.
Right. They are watching these lights bobbing in the massive swells. And then two massive, completely silent flashes of brilliant light erupt from the exact direction of the ship. Instantly, the running lights vanish. The ocean goes completely, utterly dark again.
The captain of the Harlow is stunned. I mean, he initially thinks he just witnessed a catastrophic boiler explosion, that the ship behind them just blew itself to pieces.
Which makes sense based on what he saw.
It does. But the first mate, standing right next to him on the bridge, immediately starts talking him out of it. The mate rationalizes that the flashes must have simply been brush fires on the distant African shoreline, a somewhat common occurrence, though highly unlikely in the middle of a torrential cyclone.
Yeah, why would there be brush fires in a hurricane?
Exactly. But the captain, seeking comfort, agrees with his mate, dismisses the horrifying thing they just saw with her own eyes, and, incredibly, doesn't even log the event in the ship's official record.
I really want to stop and zero in on this moment because from the outside, reading it a century later, it is baffling.
It really is hard to comprehend.
Picture the visual. You are standing on a rolling, freezing deck in pitch blackness. The wind is screaming. You are watching the lights of a massive ship a few miles behind you. You see a colossal flash of light and the ship just vanishes from existence.
It blinks out.
Yeah. How do two highly experienced sailors look at a potential catastrophic explosion, the sudden disappearance of hundreds of people, and just talk themselves into believing it's a brush fire on a beach they can't even see?
It's deeply tragic, but raises a vital point about human psychology in crisis, specifically a phenomenon known as normalcy bias.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Normalcy bias is a powerful cognitive state where people radically underestimate both the possibility of a disaster and its potential effects, simply because it falls too far outside their daily experience.
So they just reject the reality of it?
Exactly. In extreme, life-threatening maritime conditions, the human brain is already under immense stress. It desperately seeks a mundane, harmless explanation to avoid confronting a horrifying reality that might require them to take dangerous action.
They didn't want to turn around in a cyclone.
Precisely. You also have to remember the technological era we are discussing. Without radio communication, mariners in 1909 existed in bubbles of profound, terrifying isolation. If a ship sank 5 miles away from you, unless you physically saw the shattered debris wash up against your own hull, it was as if it happened on the dark side of the moon.
They were totally cut off.
They couldn't pick up a radio and call for clarification, They had to trust their eyes, and their brains actively deceived their eyes to protect their own sanity in the middle of the storm.
And the mystery only deepens from there, because later that exact same night, around 21:30, another ship, the Guelph, encounters a vessel struggling in the violent storm.
Another phantom passing in the night.
Right. They pull alongside at a distance and flash their signal lamps at each other, trying to communicate. But the rain is so blinding, the swells are so horrific, tossing both ships violently into the air, that the crew of the Guelph only catches 3 letters from the other ship's signal lamp before losing them in the dark.
Just 3 letters?
Yeah. TAH.
Which, of course, perfectly matches the end of the name Waratah.
Exactly. But again, due to the violence of the storm, they lose visual contact. These glimpses in the dark, the massive flashes of light, the partial name blinking in the rain, they are terrifying, fragmented clues. But what is truly chilling is that while these mariners were seeing ghosts in the pitch-black storm, one man, standing safely on the shoreline the very next morning, claims to have watched the beast actually die in the cold light of day.
The secret eyewitness.
Yes, the secret eyewitness. This blew my mind when I read his diary entries. It's July 28th. The cyclone is still raging off the coast. Edward Joe Conker, who is a Cape-mounted rifleman, a soldier, is out on a military exercise near the mouth of the Exora River in South Africa.
Right on the coast.
He pulls out his military-grade telescope and aims it out at the churning, violent ocean. Through the glass, he watches a steamer, which perfectly matches the visual description and silhouette of the Waratah, fighting a desperate, losing battle against the ocean.
The cinematic horror of what Conker claims to have seen through that lens cannot be overstated. I mean, he is standing on solid ground watching a 9,000-ton steel giant being battered and tossed like a child's bath toy.
According to his personal diary, he watches the ship get struck broadside by a massive wave, and she rolls agonizingly to her starboard side. But this time, the weeble-wobble doesn't hesitate and slowly come back up.
It just stays down.
This time, she just stays down. As she lies helplessly on her side, completely exposed to the wrath of the cyclone, Conker watches as a massive falling wave, a towering wall of black water rises up over the helpless, stricken vessel, and it simply buries her. Conker watches through his telescope as the ocean swallows 465 feet of modern steel in a matter of seconds.
I want us to really think about the human element of that precise moment. The sheer, unimaginable terror for the 211 people trapped inside that hull.
Exactly. I want you listening right now to try and put yourself inside that ship during that final, fatal roll.
It's horrifying to even picture.
It is. Imagine you are in that luxurious music lounge, maybe clinging to a bolted-down velvet chair as the storm rages outside. Suddenly, the floor tilts 45 degrees, then 60, then 90.
You're standing on the walls.
Yeah, the screeching of the metal hull bending and tearing under the immense stress of the ocean is deafening. The ship plunges, and instantly, the massive steam engines tear loose from their mountings, snapping the power cables. The electric lights fail. You are violently thrown into absolute suffocating darkness.
Absolute nightmare.
The freezing waters of the Southern Ocean explode through the shattered glass of the promenade deck, rushing into the lounge. Deep down in the cargo hold, 1,000 tons of heavy lead ore break loose and slam against the starboard hull, ensuring the ship can never right itself. It is total, inescapable psychological terror, but mercifully, it likely lasted only seconds before the freezing water took you.
And while those 211 men, women, and children were experiencing their final horrific moments in the dark, Edward Joe Conker lowers his telescope on the shoreline. He is shaken to his core.
I mean, how could you not be?
He turns to his orderly sergeant, his commanding officer, and frantically reports what he just saw. He tells him he just witnessed the death of a massive ocean liner. And the sergeant, well, he just shrugs it off.
What?
He ignores the report entirely and tells Conker to get back to his military duties.
Wait, I have to stop here. How does a military officer hear a frantic report from one of his men saying, a massive passenger ship just capsized and sank right off our coast, and just go about his day? Does he think Conker is hallucinating?
It highlights a staggering, almost offensive disconnect between land-based authorities and the lethal realities of the sea. There was a prevailing assumption among the general public, heavily fueled by the shipping line's own aggressive marketing and propaganda, that modern ships like the Waratah were mathematically, scientifically unsinkable.
So he just didn't believe it was possible.
To the sergeant standing safely on a beach, the idea that a modern 465-foot steel ship could just vanish under a single wave was absurd. It contradicted everything he had read in the newspapers about modern British engineering.
So he just thought Conker was overreacting.
He likely assumed Conker had just seen a ship dip behind a large swell and panicked. As a direct result of this apathy, Conker's confirmed sighting wouldn't be made public until 1929, 20 years too late to help a single soul or direct the search efforts.
That is infuriating. So with the ship sitting dead at the bottom of an abyssal trench, the rest of the world is agonizingly unaware. The horror of the event shifted from the screaming passengers drowning in the dark to the families waiting quietly in port. And looking at the newspapers from the weeks following the disappearance, the phantom searches and the false hopes are, in many ways, the cruelest part of this entire tragedy.
They really are. Because the psychological torture of the families was prolonged for months.
Initially reading the reports, no one panics at all. In 1909, ships were often late. If you hit a bad storm, you burned more coal, you slowed down, you arrived a few days behind schedule. But as the days slowly turn into weeks, this creeping, suffocating dread sets in across London and Australia. But why wasn't anyone completely panicked on day 5? Why did the shipping line still project total confidence?
Because there was a very famous historical precedent for a ship disappearing and surviving, and everyone from the executives down to the grieving mothers clung to it desperately.
What was the precedent?
They cited the case of the steamship Waikato from 1899. The Waikato snapped her propeller shaft in the Southern Ocean and drifted completely helplessly in the freezing currents for over 100 days before finally being spotted and towed to safety.
Oh, wow. 100 days.
Yeah. And the Waikato was stocked with enough provisions to feed everyone for a year. So the prevailing theory that took hold in the public imagination and fueled their hope was that her engines had simply failed in the cyclone, and she was adrift.
But the horrifying undercurrent to that hope were 211 people starving, freezing in the dark, slowly drifting south toward the icy wastes of Antarctica.
That terrifying thought triggered one of the most frantic, massive, and ultimately fruitless search efforts in maritime history. The British Admiralty gets involved. The Royal Navy sends out heavily armored cruisers, the Pandora, the Forte, the Hermes.
They sent warships out to look for them.
They steam straight into the area of the cyclone. The weather is still so violent that the Hermes actually strains her own heavily armored hull just trying to navigate the waves where the Waratah was last seen. And then the gruesome discoveries begin. Or rather, the gruesome non-discoveries, which almost broke the spirit of the searchers.
Yes, the Insizwa incident. On August 13th, a passing steamship called the Insizwa reports a truly morbid, chilling sighting near the Bashi River, which is right near the Waratah's last known position. They signal the shore that they are seeing dozens of human bodies floating in the water.
And you can imagine the panic and heartbreak that caused.
The tugboat Harry Escombe is immediately rushed out from port to recover the dead. The crew prepares themselves mentally for the traumatic task of pulling waterlogged corpses of women and children from the swell. But when they arrive at the coordinates, it's a horrifying trick of the eye.
It's just awful.
The floating bodies turn out to be massive chunks of whale offal and dead skatefish that had been churned up by the storm. It's as if the ocean is literally mocking them.
Undeterred, the search expands to an almost incomprehensible scale. A massive ship called the Sabine is chartered by the families and the government. She is specifically fitted with giant military searchlights and elevated crow's nests. She zigzags relentlessly across the freezing southern Indian Ocean for 8 straight weeks, covering a staggering 14,000 nautical miles of open water.
14,000 miles. That is mind-boggling.
Another ship, the Wakefield, takes the search even further south, checking the desolate, freezing, uninhabited islands of the Kerguelen archipelago near Antarctica, looking for castaways shivering on the rocks, hoping to find a camp of survivors.
And what did they find?
They found absolutely nothing. Not a single lifeboat, not a cork life jacket, not a splinter of wooden decking.
It's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is constantly moving, it's freezing cold, it spans thousands of miles, and it is actively trying to kill you while you search. And this obsession to find her didn't just stop in 1909 when the official searches were called off. Fast forward to the modern era. Enter a man named Emlyn Brown. He spent 22 years of his life, from 1983 to 2004, hunting the ghost of the Waratah. In 1999, his expedition actually got a massive sonar hit.
They thought they had it.
They really did. A huge steel hull sitting perfectly intact on the seafloor off the eastern coast of South Africa. The press went wild. Everyone thought we finally found her. The century-old mystery is solved.
But it wasn't her.
No. When they sent deep-sea submersibles down in 2001 to film the wreck, it wasn't the Waratah. It was the Nailsea Meadow, a World War II cargo ship sunk by a German U-boat decades later. Even with modern, state-of-the-art sonar technology, the ocean flat-out refuses to give up the Waratah.
With absolutely no physical evidence ever recovered, no bodies, no debris, investigators, naval architects, and maritime historians were left with nothing but shadows, whispers, and highly contested theories. Since we have no physical body to examine, we have to perform an autopsy on a ghost using physics and logic.
Let's break down these theories, because they are terrifying in their plausibility, and they really highlight how many ways the ocean can kill you.
Right.
The first, and most prominent among maritime historians, is the rogue wave theory. We are talking about the wild coast of South Africa, an area notoriously famous for freak oceanographic conditions that produce waves up to 20 meters. That is 66 feet high.
To put that in perspective for the listener, imagine a solid wall of freezing water taller than a six-story building. And a wave of that magnitude doesn't just roll over you, it slams down on the deck with the sheer, crushing force of solid concrete.
Right. And you have this top-heavy ship, the Waratah, already listing heavily to starboard, already struggling to right herself in a cyclone, as we learned from Professor Bragg's bathtub observations. This 66-foot monster hits her broadside. It would stave in the massive wooden cargo hatches instantly. Thousands of tons of seawater flood the holds in seconds.
It would be instantaneous.
But here's the most horrifying part of this theory, and it perfectly explains the central mystery of why nothing was ever found floating. If the sheer force of that wave rolled the ship completely over, capsizing her instantly, the massive steel hull acts like an inverted cup.
Right, it traps everything inside.
All the buoyant debris, the wooden deck chairs, the life jackets, the panicked passengers, the bodies are trapped inside the steel tomb under the water, and then the immense shifting weight of the engines and cargo drags the entire intact structure straight down into the abyssal trench.
It is horrifyingly perfect in its physics. It leaves no trace. It explains the sudden disappearance and the utter lack of wreckage. But there is another major theory that focuses not on an external attack by a wave, but on the enemy within: cargo liquefaction.
The cargo shift. I found this part of the research fascinating and terrifying. The Waratah was carrying 1,000 tons of raw lead and 300 tons of lead or concentrate deep in her belly.
In 1909, the extreme dynamic dangers of carrying raw or concentrate were not fully understood by the shipping industry. Today, it is highly regulated due to a physical phenomenon called the free surface effect.
Which is what exactly?
Under the violent, constant shaking, vibration, and rolling of a cyclone, solid lead ore can absorb ambient moisture from the air and actually change its physical state. It turns from a solid, stable mound of rock into a dense, viscous, incredibly heavy liquid sludge.
Okay, visualize this with me. The ship slowly rolls to starboard, doing that terrifying hesitation we talked about with the weeble wobble. Suddenly, the friction holding that pile of ore breaks. Thousands of pounds of dense liquid lead slide across the hold and violently slam against the starboard hull.
Exactly. It acts as a massive, inescapable internal anchor. The ship is trying desperately to right itself, fighting gravity, but the center of gravity has dynamically, permanently shifted to the far right. The ship is dragged down by the sheer weight of its own shifting cargo, rolling over and sinking before the crew even comprehends what is happening.
There are other chilling theories, too, that we found in the archives. The whirlpool theory, that she was caught in a freak combination of gale force winds, opposing ocean currents, and deep ocean trenches, and simply sucked down whole into the abyss in a massive vortex.
That one is more legendary, but still frightening.
And then there is the coal dust explosion theory, which attempts to validate the Harlow sighting of those two massive flashes of light in the dark.
It's historically accurate that coal dust in unventilated bunkers can self-combust. In the right mixture with oxygen, it is highly explosive. And the Waratah already had a history of bunker fires on her maiden voyage.
But I have to push back on that one entirely. I was reading through the naval architect reports, and if it was a massive internal explosion that blew the ship apart, which would cause the flashes the Harlow saw, wouldn't there be a massive debris field?
That is the logical flaw in that theory.
Right. A blast big enough to sink a 465-foot steel ship instantly would shatter the hull outward. There would be thousands of pieces of shattered wood, cork, life rings, clothing, something floating on the surface for the search ships to find, right? You can't blow up a ship and leave zero trace.
That is a fantastic point, and that is exactly why the modern maritime community largely rejects the explosion theory, despite the eyewitness account of the flashes. The physics of an explosion dictates that it scatters material across a wide radius.
Whereas a capsize traps it.
A capsize, conversely, traps material. The absolute, deafening lack of debris always points back to the ship rolling over, completely intact, and taking everything and everyone down with her in that inverted cup scenario.
So the lack of answers, the failure of the searches, leaves this gaping infected wound in maritime history, a wound that destroyed reputations, shattered families, and birthed a dark, enduring legacy. Let's talk about the aftermath. December 1910, Caxton Hall in London. The official Board of Trade Inquiries convened.
This inquiry was highly anticipated, and it turned into an absolute public relations disaster for the Blue Anchor Line. It peeled back the curtain and exposed a corporate culture of assumed competence that was actually grounded in dangerous, willful negligence.
The inquiry transcripts read like a gripping courtroom drama. It brings to light this horrific realization. The executives at the Blue Anchor Line had never explicitly asked Captain Ilbery about the ship's handling or stability after its maiden voyage.
They just didn't want to know.
And Ilbery, perhaps fearing for his pension and his job, had never formally documented his obvious fears in writing. The company just blindly assumed that because her older sister ship, the Geelong, was structurally fine, the Waratah was automatically fine, despite them being built by completely different shipyards to different specifications.
The testimonies at the inquiry were maddeningly contradictory, which only added to the agony of the families watching in the gallery. You had stevedores, the burly men who actually loaded the ship in port, testifying under oath that the Waratah was so incredibly unstable when she was unladen that they couldn't even safely move her across the harbor without adding hundreds of tons of heavy ballast just to keep her from tipping over at the dock.
Which is damning evidence.
But then the shipping line's lawyers would immediately produce a counter-witness, a loyal stoker or a former first-class passenger who swore up and down she was as steady as a rock.
It was a circus designed to protect corporate assets. But despite the obfuscation, the damage was done. The financial ruin of the Blue Anchor Line was swift and brutal. Public trust vanished overnight.
No one wanted to sail with them.
Ticket sales for their other ships plummeted to zero. Nobody wanted to board a Blue Anchor Line vessel. Furthermore, the Waratah was massively underinsured, taking a huge chunk of the company's operating capital down to the bottom of the ocean with her. By 1910, unable to recover, the company collapsed into voluntary liquidation. They were forced to sell off their entire remaining fleet to P&O and dissolve entirely.
And amidst all this corporate fallout, the boardroom drama and the financial ruin, you have the human element, the families. Hundreds of people in Australia and England, mothers, fathers, children, trapped in an agonizing, seemingly endless limbo, not knowing exactly how their loved ones died or if they were somehow still alive on a deserted rock.
Just waiting for news that never comes.
And the media of the time ruthlessly exploited that grief for profit.
The cruelty of the hoax. This specific part of the story makes my blood boil. In 1913, 4 years after the disappearance, a newspaper in Brisbane, the Daily Mail, suspected that a rival paper was stealing their exclusive stories.
A petty media feud.
Exactly. So, as a trap to catch the plagiarists, the Daily Mail publishes a completely fabricated, sensationalized hoax article claiming that the Waratah had finally been discovered frozen solid in the ice of Antarctica with bodies visible on the decks.
The rival paper, hungry for a scoop, fell for the trap and republished the story, even adding their own fake quotes from a local harbor master to make it seem more credible to their readers. But the tragic collateral damage of this petty media war was the families.
Exactly. For a brief, shining, heart-stopping moment, mothers and fathers reading the morning paper believed their children's bodies had finally been found. They thought they were finally going to get closure, a burial, an answer.
It's just sickening.
Only to have that hope violently, callously ripped away just a day later when it was revealed as a cheap, fabricated trick to sell newspapers and catch a rival. It was an act of profound journalistic cruelty that re-traumatized hundreds of people.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of these maritime mysteries. Which brings us to her enduring legacy. The Waratah is almost universally referred to as Australia's Titanic.
The parallels to the Titanic are just uncanny. The immense corporate hubris, the unsinkable moniker printed in the brochures, the top-heavy luxury prioritizing first-class amenities over fundamental safety, the devastating massive loss of civilian life. But in a way, if you really think about it, the story of the Waratah is far more terrifying than the Titanic.
How so?
Because with the Titanic, we know the ending of the story. We know exactly how it died. It sideswiped an iceberg. We know where it is. We have the haunting, high-definition footage of the wreck resting quietly on the Atlantic floor.
Right, there's a tangible conclusion.
There is a definitive closure to the narrative. We found the bodies, we read the survivors' accounts, but the Waratah represents the ultimate primal fear of the unknown. It is the void. It is a 9,000-ton steel skyscraper full of 211 terrified people that the ocean simply swallowed whole, leaving no survivors, no wreckage, no final messages.
She remains the Titanic of the South. A luxurious steel coffin resting somewhere in the crushing, lightless abyssal trenches of the Indian Ocean. Her final moments, a secret kept only by the immense pressure of the deep. It is a mystery that, barring a miraculous sonar discovery, will likely remain unsolved until the end of time.
And that brings us to the final, chilling thought I want to leave you with today, building on everything we've uncovered from these sources. We live in an era of unprecedented technological mapping. We can map the surface of Mars in high definition from millions of miles away.
We can track everything.
We track the precise trajectories of tiny, obscure asteroids flying through the vacuum of space. We feel like we are masters of our environment, but right here on Earth, our own oceans are so unimaginably vast, so incomprehensibly deep, and so completely, utterly hostile to human life that a 465-foot steel leviathan full of people can simply vanish between breakfast and dinner.
It really humbles you.
It does. And over a century later, despite our advanced sonar, our deep-sea submarines, and our satellites, the ocean still stubbornly refuses to spit out a single piece of the puzzle. We started this deep dive talking about the expectation of precision. But the ocean doesn't give us precision, and it doesn't owe us answers. So the next time you stand on a beach, feeling the warm sand between your toes, and you look out at that dark, flat, seemingly peaceful horizon, ask yourself, what else is the ocean hiding in the dark?
A profoundly chilling question to end on. Thank you for joining us on this descent into the abyss. Stay curious, always question the official narrative, and above all, respect the deep.